Bonjour, hoje bia gain any indigo, Mishkanto dem, Mississauga Jibun, Snavinda, Majoma Shomas, Gajimanado, Miguich Gijikat non gum, Miguich Gizis, Meno de Gizis, Menodanak, Miguich Anaquadon, Miguich Awan, Menogimi one, Menoagon, Miguich Savinza one, Menozibi one, Menozagai Ganin, Menogich the dog and be. Miguich Metek Oak, Menoa Metekunsak, Menola Mashkusi, Menoa Ganing. Miguich Benashuk, Menoa Wesanuk, Abakanak, Menoa Gigonsak, Menoa Menadonsak. Miguich Wabalang Nodin, Menoa Jawalang Nodin, Menoa Lingabialang Nodin, Menoa Givajanang Nodin. Miguich and Danakochibichaganik, Menoa Widigimagan, Menoa Danisak, Menoa Roses, Menoa Jansak, Menoa Kochibichaganik. Miguich Kakanagego, Niniwak, Kwewak, we no matter Minamano Gum. We are no king, we have a dokam zokamakwe, Menoa Maganaduk. Chimiguich Gajamanado, Mina Mamatman. In Dorjibem Bangyatgo, I only have a little bit of my language. And what I did was, with a little bit I have, was to give thanks for the rest of creation. And I started in the sky world and I worked my way down to the earth and mentioning the trees, the insects, the fish, the animals, and I mentioned the people last. And I give thanks for the people who are sitting today on, I guess we're sitting on something, but I don't know what we're sitting on, some modern technology. And we're working to help the rest of creation. And when people ask me to do a land acknowledgement, I do it in much the same way. And I mentioned the nations that were here first. And then when I mention those nations, people look around and they think, wow, I've heard those ones before. Because I start off by mentioning the Metikok Nation, the Gigonsak Nation, the Manadonsak Nation, the Oisarak Nation, and I go on. You can go on for a while naming all those nations. And those are the nations that were here first. And that comes from our creation story, because humans came here last. We were put here last. And so after I mention a few of those nations, then people look around trying to think, why did they never heard of those nations before? It's because we don't acknowledge them. And when we do a land acknowledgement, the way it is done is we just acknowledge people. Which brings us to the point where we are today, where we have climate change, we have environmental destruction, and all those things, because we don't recognize what we call Nindui Maganaduk, all of my relatives. And we're referring to the non-human relatives. So the Metikok Nation is the tree nation. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as the standing ones. And the Gigonsak Nation is the fish nation. The Manadonsak Nation is the insect nation. And when we recognize those nations first, it helps us to put us in a place where we recognize where we're supposed to sit. And we're not supposed to sit on top because we got here last. And we're supposed to respect the rest of creation, because without the rest of creation, we can't survive. And all the rest of creation in our creation story offered to help us, to give us what we needed to live. And we're only supposed to take as much as we need. And when you go beyond taking more than what you need, you enter the realm of a being which I'm not supposed to mention at this time. We're only supposed to mention when the snow is on the ground. But the essence of this being is greed. And people dismiss it as a myth, as a legend, but it is real, because the essence of greed is real. And so when we do an opening and someone asks you to do a land recognition or acknowledgement, you should do that. You shouldn't just make it a people thing, because being a people thing is what brought us to where we are now. And so um, I think that's a good place to start. And one of the reasons that we got to this place is because when Europeans got here, they intentionally, purposely separated us from the rest of creation. And I believe the same thing was done to them a long time ago before they got here, because I believe at one time everyone had this connection. And it has been broken. And we need to fix it. And if we don't fix it, it will fix us. All you have to do is look at the rest of your relatives. How are they doing? When's the last time you saw a passenger pigeon? When's the last time you saw a bobolink or a meadowlark? These are things, these last two used to be common when I was a kid. I only saw one last year, and I saw a meadowlark this year for the first time in years and years and years. So how are your relatives doing? Not so well. And, you know, I like to tell students about the canary in the coal mine, because most students don't know that a long time ago in England, they took a canary in the coal mine, and if the canary died, they got the heck out of there because the air was bad. And that comes from their this little saying about the canary in the coal mine. And the canary in the coal mine is a warning. When the canary dies, better get the heck out of there or do something different. And today, every day, we have hundreds of canaries dying. Not necessarily canaries. It might be frogs. It might be other things that are dying off because we are poisoning them, and we are slowly poisoning ourselves. On the bright side, it's a nice sunny day. And so I better quit talking so somebody else can flap their gums. So Chimegwich isn't Dalvik. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Peter, so much. True, true words. With that, I just wanted to introduce quickly Edward Nicolucci and Alexander Service, who will be providing a few opening remarks before I go through some light housekeeping, and then we're going to continue on with our conversation. So with that, Edward, are you able to give us some opening reflections?
Yes, thank you, Aaron. And good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Edward Nicolucci. I work in the city of Mississauga in the Planning and Building Department and am the project lead for the Green Development Standards Update. So the city of Mississauga, in its climate action plan, has identified that the green standards really should better address climate change and building resiliency. So through that project, we are seeking a deeper understanding and appreciation for the Indigenous perspective on sustainable development. We know that the Indigenous people have a connection to the land, and we should listen and learn from that connection. As such, one of the goals of the project is to incorporate Indigenous perspectives into the Green Development Standards and, of course, future policies. So with that, thank you to our honored guests for joining us here today. Really anxious to hear all the great discussions today. And now I will turn it over to Ali from the town of Caledon.
Thanks, Edward. I'm Ali. I'm with the Town of Caledon's Energy and Environment Division and leading our first Green Development Standard along similar timelines to the City of Mississauga, which is how this partnership stemmed. Caledon shares the same commitment to sustainability as Mississauga, but we are, of course, in a very different development context. So Caledon is a largely rural community that will see significant development of greenfield areas of our farmland over the coming years. We are building new communities from scratch, which means we have a chance to get things right from the start and develop differently than we did in the past. But we can't get that right if we're not hearing from Indigenous peoples that have stewarded this land for generations before us and embedding those learnings in how we plan and develop. So the town is very grateful to have the opportunity today to listen and learn and hopefully start a longer term conversation. So I'll pass it back over to Erin.
Thank you, Ali. I'm just going to start our quick housekeeping slides for those of you who are joining us today. My name is Erin Senior, and I'm going to be the host for today's session. And I wanted to thank you all for joining us for this very significant conversation. Today, we have over 250 municipal staff, Indigenous people, builders, architects, landscape architects, and others joining us from across this land to listen to our speakers reflect on how city builders can more meaningfully integrate Indigenous ways of knowing into our towns and cities. I wanted to note that there's going to be no Q&A today or chat during the conversation that we're going to have. Your participation is through active listening and reflecting on what was heard today. There is, however, closed captioning for today's session, so if you'd like to, you can turn that on at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. And we wanted to let you know that today's session is being recorded, and a copy of it will be available next week on the Green Development Standards websites for the town of Caledon, as well as the city of Mississauga. You will receive an email after this webinar that will give you the links to those websites, as well as the project contact information should you have any follow-up questions. We know that technology can sometimes be tricky. It's WebEx. So if there are any technical issues that arise during the meeting, please contact Amina. Her information is on the page right there. Now you can see that there's a QR code posted here, and this essentially is for reflections after the meeting. So while you're listening, as I've said, actively listening to the discussion that we're having today, there's an opportunity after we've had this session to post your reflections and ideas to our Green Development Standard website. And we're going to be collecting these as part of a follow-up resource document, which we will be posting on the website at a later date. So with that, and thank you, Juliana, for posting that in the chat. So with that, the housekeeping is done, and I would now like to open this up to the conversation we're about to have. This afternoon, we are very grateful to have 5 Indigenous speakers share their perspectives as people, elders, architects, and planners on sustainable development. We are very honored to have Miranda Jimmy moderating and participating in today's conversation as well. So with that, Roger, can you please bring the speakers up to the stage? There'll just be a little transition. And now I'd like to turn it over to Miranda to facilitate the introductions, moderate, and participate in this conversation. Thank you, Miranda. Hi, Miranda. Can you hear?
There we go. Yeah.
Great, perfect.
Tansei ni totem tawau. Hello, friends, and welcome. The next hour and a half or so together, where you're about to bear witness to a conversation amongst relations, as we learn about each other and about ourselves and explore our own relationship with the land. You'll hear from a panel of Indigenous people who come from a variety of lived experiences and professional understandings. Together, we'll explore our own identities and professions as they intersect with our teachings, our cultural practices, and our own connections to Mother Earth. As Erin mentioned, this event might be a little different than what you're expecting. We were all invited here today by the town of Caledon and the city of Mississauga to talk about sustainable development and renewing green development standards, which are very colonial practices. Rather than slide decks and talking points, we'll be returning to the roots of what really makes all of this possible, the land that sustains us. So please open your hearts and your minds, sit back, grab a cup of tea, and join us at our virtual kitchen table for a chat. So let's begin by meeting who's here to chat today. I'll turn it over. We've had a chance to hear from our elder today, but Peter, if you could please introduce yourself.
Bonjour, j'ai bien gagné Indigo, Michigan to them. My taxpayer name is Peter Schuler. I'm from Mississauga of the Credit, and I live on Six Nations, and so basically New Credit and or Mississauga of the Credit and Six Nations are just across the road from each other. And my wife insists I live with her, so this is where I live. So anyway, that's just about me.
Thank you, Peter. Jessica.
Hi everyone, Jessica Wakefield. I am joining today from Toronto. I am of mixed descent. I am Anishinaabe on my mother's side. I am a band member at Kettle and Stony Point First Nation. I did not have the opportunity to grow up on reserve, but I continue to spend lots of time there. And I do have a few pictures here. Aaron, can you pull up my slide, please? So these pictures are they're of my grandma. She does drive a lot of the work that I do. She's no longer with us, but kind of keep her spirit and her memory close. So she was a residential school survivor. She's also a graduate of Lakehead University, and she led the charge for our community, the Stony Point lands at Wash, to kind of get our lands back after they were taken during the Second World War. Thanks. A bit more about my background. So I did an undergrad at Queen's University, and then I moved on to Western University, where I first learned about planning and this notion that I could strive for Indigenous perspectives in planning. And I now am at the University of Guelph as a graduate student, working closely with Dr. Sherry Longboat on Indigenous perspectives in planning and what this means kind of at the local First Nation level. And I'm also an environmental planner with SOAR Professional Services, and we are Indigenous owned and operated. And lastly, I come to the panel today with experience and lots of passion for building strong, meaningful, and safe relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous parties, with the desire to further understand what safe spaces look like for Indigenous people in urban environments, noting that this really includes the workforce as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jess. Freedom.
Hello, my name is Freedom Stone. I am Anishinaabe Kwit and Jamaican. I grew up predominantly in Brampton and Toronto, so I have more urban roots, I could say. But my family is rooted in Wasauksing First Nation. My mom is doing the heavy lifting and trying to figure out our history and the connections that we've lost there. So throughout, for more educationally and professionally, I have a passion for designing spaces and showcasing BIPOC communities through representation. I'm equally dedicated to integrating sustainable practices into my work, concentrating on building science during my bachelor's degree, and recently achieving my certification in Passive House. I am a project lead and intern architect with Smoke Architecture, an Indigenous founded and operated firm, and I'm working towards getting my license.
Thanks, Freedom. And Eric.
Ani Mamunukaji. Hi, friends. Anishinaabe Moan. My name is Eric. I'm an Anishinaabe Ojibwe, a member of the Mishpekatan First Nation, specifically the Muckwa or the Bear Clan. The Muckwa clan historically were the protectors or defenders of the eastern Lake Superior region. And when spending a lot of times outdoors protecting, you get to go know nature. So we're also the holders of the medicine. I'm an architect, project architect at Turo Architect. We're a 100% owned and operated Indigenous design firm based on the Six Nation of the Grand River in Noshirkin, Ontario, where Peter lives. We design and consult in the realm of architecture, landscape, public art, exhibition design, and I live and work in Toronto, Treaty 13. Currently, I'm working on the Art Gallery of Ontario expansion, the Block 2 Federal Building in Ottawa, and a new community called Quayside, which is a mixed-use development on the Toronto waterfront.
Thank you. And Miranda Jimmy Ochi, Miskuchi Waskahikan. My name is Miranda Jimmy. I come to you from the heart of Treaty 6 and Miskuchi Waskahikan, known to many as Edmonton, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, the Cree, the Dene, Nakota Sioux, Saulteaux, Métis, and settlers and descendants of settlers from all over the world. Here on the banks of what is currently known as the North Saskatchewan River, Indigenous people have been gathering for time immemorial to share, teach, trade, learn, and celebrate, and I hope those same spirits bring us together today. I work remotely from Edmonton for the Ontario Professional Planners Institute as the Director of Reconciliation and Social Justice. And I'm honored to host the conversation today with some new friends that I've met virtually through this connection of this conversation. I am a proud member of Thunderchild First Nation, which is downstream from here. And my relatives, my ancestors, were signatories to an adhesion to Treaty 6 in 1879. On my maternal side, I have Lakota roots to Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota. And I come to this work calling myself a cultural translator or cultural connector. My career has been working with mainstream organizations that have programs and services to offer to Indigenous and other racially marginalized communities, and building bridges between those services and programs to those communities, and then advocating on behalf of those communities to transform those programs and services to better meet their needs. As I walk this road of decolonizing personally, like Jess, I am an intergenerational survivor of residential school, and this history and this culture and this experience was denied to me because of that experience that my father had attending school. I've been walking this path of decolonizing and reconnecting with my culture. And as I learn that, as I walk this path, I want to share that knowledge with others who are trying to do the same. And I think it's those that path of decolonizing and bringing together two worlds that the five of us share in common. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to host the conversation today and to learn more from the folks around this virtual kitchen table. So one of the things we also have in common is that our Indigenous identity is foundational to who we are, whatever stage we're at in connecting with that, understanding that, exploring that. But we also bring that to our work in a professional way. Jess, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how your Indigenous identity challenges your professional practice.
Sure. I think I can kind of start with my space, kind of the Indigenous space, I guess, I've been taking up during planning school and transitioning into my early career in environmental planning. You know, I've only been in the career for just over a year, but I think it's challenging the practice in general as it relates to the opportunities that are there for Indigenous professionals. Currently, there is a general feeling of loneliness. I don't know too many Indigenous planners in Ontario, but I think we are starting to see some of the doors opening for Indigenous perspectives and voices within the profession. And I think within this, we're going to see over the next, 5 to 10 years, more and more opportunities for Indigenous planners and Indigenous students in planning schools. Also this idea, I guess, of finding balance and challenging the profession to kind of support this balance of Indigenous ways of doing for individuals like myself, while living and working within the profession that is more based on, more stricter timelines, more kind of economically based, and being able to work in a good way that honors and respects all of my relations, allowing me to meaningfully consider those, 7 generations in the future while honoring the past and those who were here 7 generations ago. So it's really challenging the timelines and schedules and the expectations of practice, and creating space for Indigenous professionals like myself to feel safe and feel okay to incorporate more professional and personal connections, times for reflection, learning opportunities, and then sharing these moments with my team and partners as well.
Thanks, Jess. Peter, I know you do lots of work with municipalities and are often asked for advice and wisdom from your Indigenous ways of knowing. How do you bring that into this work of working with municipalities?
Well, it's kind of hard to describe because most of the time I don't know what I'm doing. I just follow this tobacco around. But I think when you're looking at changing the ways you build or and plan, I think you first of all have to change the philosophy behind building and the philosophy behind the way we live. Because as Indigenous people, for the most part, we had more communal living, and everyone supported everyone else, which is counter to the way we are educated these days, or people are educated. We have this education model where everyone's encouraged to be an individual. Everyone's encouraged to stand on their own 2 feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how we lived. And if you go to look at more of a communal philosophy, there's less waste. If you share things, there's less waste. If you help each other out, it's easier to live. And even in my lifetime, I remember when I was young, if someone house burned down or something, that people would get together and help them rebuild, or you would work to help that community member. And even today, we try to do that. And I don't know how you change that philosophy other than putting that other philosophy into practice and allowing people to see how that works. And build that into your community so that's going to encourage community more than individual. And I think there's far smarter people than me that can figure out ways of doing that. But I think that's key. And when we look at climate change, that's also key. Change the way you think, change your philosophy, because the philosophy that we're following now, where everyone's individual and you can grab as much as you want, isn't working. And like, you don't have to be a rocket ship scientist to figure out we're in trouble. And a rocket ship scientist isn't going to get us out of this. We have to do that our work ourselves, and that requires everyone working together, which is community. And so, part of that community building is getting to know each other, meeting, talking with people who are not like you, getting to understand them. People are people, and just because I drive a Ford doesn't mean that you're wrong if you drive a Chevy. We have to kind of work these kind of things out where we work together. And I remember when I was a kid, we used to hitchhike all over the place if we didn't have a way. Now nobody's hitchhiking anymore. And but that was a way of helping out a community member. You saw somebody walking down the road, their thumb was out, you gave them a ride. And that part of that was that people trusted each other. And that's another thing we have to build, is trust. And doesn't come in a building. It comes in a package. You have to make that. You have to work on it. So that's kind of what I try to encourage people, is change the way you think. Because if you go back to our creation story, the first thing in creation was thought. That was the first thing that was created. And we create what we think. And I always think about the Dick Tracy comics that were in the newspaper when I was a kid. Dick Tracy had a watch. He could look into it. There was a movie video on there. He could talk into it. And there's your smartwatch of today. That science fiction of the day has become what's real today. And so we need to change the way we think so that we can build something that works. Because we can do that. That's been proven over and over again, that we create what we think. So we have to change the way we think and help each other out. Be nice people. Be kind to the environment. That making that connection back to respecting and having a spiritual connection to the environment is really, really important. I think that's key in solving things. And I think I better quit talking so somebody else can have 4 words in there.
Thank you, Peter. Eric, you work for a firm that has decided to be Indigenous owned and has built that into its structure. I'm just wondering how your own Indigenous identity factors into the structure of who you work for and your practice.
Absolutely. There's a lot of teaching in my role. And there's a lot of re-educating the public and other architects as a knowledge keeper. Indigenous architects right now are so high in demand, and we're so few in number. I say this with the utmost respect. I think it's a good problem to have, to be very busy. But I know I'm tired. I know my colleagues are tired, but we're also tirelessly committed. There's a lot of internal pressure too. There's a lot of internal pressure and challenges that I put on myself every day. I have a lot of opportunities today that my father did not. Therefore, I feel it's my responsibility to sort of honor this opportunity that the creators gifted me with. So those are a lot of feelings that are coming to me right away off the top of my head based on this question.
Thank you, Eric. And Freedom, you're more junior in your career, as well as you mentioned in your introduction how you're newly exploring your own identity and connections to your community. I'm just wondering how those two paths that you're walking, what challenges come with your profession and your personal learning that you're on?
I'd say that throughout my education and then my professional journey so far, I've had to really kind of think beyond myself, beyond my family and the way I was raised. Having to interact with all these different perspectives and experiences allowed me to really think broader. From my Indigenous upbringings that I've had from my mom, I would say that embracing my values became really important. Finding a balance between the Western norms and Indigenous practice and teachings, especially in architecture, seems kind of counterintuitive, where everything's very methodical, rigid, and deadlines. But I think one thing that I found that's very important that's come up is continuing storytelling through design, because I think the storytelling is crucial in all the teachings that I was given and in many nations, and having that being reflected in the architecture I create, I think will be good.
Thank you all for sharing. I think for me personally, it's, and many of you alluded to this, it's this balance between still exploring who you are and your own connections and understanding your own history, and then also this external pressure of everyone expecting you to know what it means to be Indigenous, know how those teachings transfer into a colonial practice, and being able to navigate that in conversations every day, recognizing that it's a gift to even be here, that our ancestors struggled for our presence here today and for that knowledge to carry on. And we have a responsibility to the ancestors who came before us and the ancestor we will be to future generations to do the best we can with what we have today. And I think that that's the balance that we're all seeking. Peter already started kind of alluding to this, but we all have a role, and many of the people listening today have a role in city building. And there is a renewed commitment in city building to explore and honor Indigenous ways of knowing and connections to the land. I'm just wondering, Freedom, as you kind of think about your career and the work that you're doing, how can city builders actually explore and honor Indigenous ways of knowing in meaningful ways?
I think one thing that I was seeking before I joined Smoke and what I finally can take part in that's really important is the consultation and collaboration processes. I think creating meaningful discussions and engaging with communities directly, kind of talking about what Peter discussed, bringing a level of respect, of trust, and community back versus just this transactional way of operating. I think that's crucial. And then as well, recognizing the land and the history that we're building on and creating these laws for, and incorporating the traditional knowledge in those processes as well. I think those are all important steps to integrating Indigenous ways of knowing. Yeah.
Jess, thinking about you as a planning professional, I'm just wondering, what does it look like in an urban environment to honor Indigenous ways?
When we kind of are starting out on new strategic plans or new projects, communities that we want to develop, and if you want to involve Indigenous people, it's doing it from the beginning and really understanding why you want to do this. Why do you want to involve and honor Indigenous ways of knowing and being in, your urban projects that you're working on? This isn't something that can be done halfway. There needs to be a commitment to learn, to change, discover new things about yourself. You really need to be all in, and kind of taking this step back and thinking about this can guide you as you start out on your work. And you're taking these early stages of the project to reflect upon what the space used to be like, what it used to provide for people, what has been lost, thinking about things that can be returned and what can be honored, and it's bringing these into the relationship building that should be happening as you're starting out on these projects. And once you're in the process, it's not asking for Indigenous input as it relates to predetermined plans or things that you've already decided along the way, and you're bringing in Indigenous input when it's convenient. It's having Indigenous participations throughout and really letting the plan or the project evolve as the relationship builds and more ideas are shared, more perspectives are included, and then committing to kind of learning what these Indigenous worldviews or perspectives are and how they're going to impact your project moving forward. I would also say honoring an Indigenous worldview and really committing to that as you embark on relationship building and projects really creates space for innovation and improvement of the norm, simply because innovation is an inherent part of Indigenous life. We're striving for that lifelong learning. We're understanding that with growth comes self-improvement, but it also comes with mistakes. But these mistakes are really a reminder for us to stop, to learn, reflect, ask for help, seek new perspectives and new relations. All of these checkpoints along the way do lead to growth, And this process might not be what you're used to. It might not look the same. You know, this path to success or your end product might be bendy, might even be a little repetitive at times as we circle back and revisit important topics as we continue to welcome new perspectives into the project. But the place that we reach at the end, it'll be worth the extra time and the effort because it is built on, you know, these experiences in the minds of diverse individuals coming together in a shared and hopefully a safe space. So yeah, if these Indigenous voices have spaces to be heard and respected and, you know, actually be the drive behind insightful and important conversations, you know, be a priority and be part of the process that actually drives decision making, then we can meaningfully honor Indigenous ways of knowing and being.
Eric, in your work, can you think of any examples where it's been obvious that Indigenous ways have been honored through the process in city building, in urban environments?
Definitely, it's starting. I'm kind of going towards the end here, so I don't want to recover a lot of the topics that were brought up by Freedom and Jess, but I really like what Jess said too about listening, engaging, and consulting. I think it's our duty. I think there's a lot to look to the future. You have to look to the past. I think there's a lot of important voices that aren't typically heard. Our traditional values are really being understood and really treasured for the first time. Miranda, if that's okay, I'd like to reframe this question a little bit. I know we're talking about city builders, but I kind of like to extend it beyond that and maybe direct it a bit more towards who's here today at the chat. But I really think everyone here can support us by supporting Indigenous organizations, by donating your time and money. I think we can support Indigenous-led grassroots movements and campaigns. Encourage others to do so. I went to Cliff Cardinal's As You Like It, or the Land Acknowledgement, which was performed at Mervis Theatre a few weeks ago. I attended, I supported him and my people, and I totally engaged myself, and it really changed my life. Another thing everyone can do here is commit to returning the land. Local, provincial, and federal governments, they're starting to return their land to Indigenous people. I think a lot of Indigenous people are starting to return their land as well. Sorry, individuals are returning their land. So research your options to return your land. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the reframing because I think we think about this as, you know, a professional mandate or a Canadian responsibility as opposed to an individual obligation to right relations. Peter, in your work with municipalities and your community work with your home community, Mississaugas with a Credit, how do you ensure that those values are present? Because your territory is now been urbanized by many municipalities and people from many nations have come into your territory. So how do you ensure that your community's knowledge and ways of working continue to be present in that space?
Well, our reserve, and I call it a reserve, not a First Nation, because that's what it is, was very, very early Christianized. And we were promised that if we adopted those ways, that it would be the best thing for us. If you look at history, I can't say that's a true statement. We lost our language, culture, our land, all of it. And so going that route did not help us at all. And so when it comes to try to ensure those traditional ways are there, that's still an ongoing battle. I'll call it a battle because it is. And, you know, I think when when you get down that road of assimilation, if you go down there far enough, and we've gone down there a long ways, is that you don't know what you've lost. And our last fluent speaker died in 1924, and that old man used to get my dad to go pick medicine for him. And my dad told me about him, I don't know how many times, but like as I got older, I wondered, why did he tell me about that guy? How many times did he tell me? He even showed me where he lived. And so I think my dad was 12 when that old man passed away. And so when it comes to try to bring things back, I think about how did that man feel being the last speaker? What knowledge left with him? And so when it comes to try to ensure that those things are in your community, you just have to keep poking along. You can't make people go to ceremonies. You can't force anybody to do anything. So the only thing you can try to do is, go and learn as much as you can, come back and share it, and live in such a way that somebody might want to follow you. That's the only way I can see of doing that. And don't be afraid to, if you see a turtle on a fence post, it didn't get there by itself, and that turtle's not going anywhere. It can move its its head and tail and legs as much as it wants, but it's not going anywhere. And so, we have a hard time because, a lot of Canadians, they think everyone is traditional. But that's far, far from the truth. It's more apt to say everybody's trying to relearn. And, and then we're all at different stages in that process. And, the further you go along in relearning, the more you realize your ancestors were really, really smart. They had philosophies that kept us sane. They had philosophies that kept us so we didn't need jails. Nobody starved to death unless everyone was starving. We didn't need mental institutions. We didn't need money. All of those things. I mean, I offend people when I say that, the people that came here weren't civilized. They say they civilized us, but I say the people that came weren't civilized. And I say that because you cannot destroy everything that supports you and call yourself civilized. I don't believe we're civilized. I believe we were civilized before people came here, but I don't believe we're civilized anymore. And so that's the philosophy I'm talking about when you have to change. Is change things so that you don't destroy your environment, you don't destroy where you live. That is what I call true civilization. And like we've gone so far away from that, it's not funny. And we're all in the same boat, but if we change the way we think, then we can get that back. But if you don't realize you're not civilized, well, then you're not going to be ever civilized. And anyway, that's my view of civilization is, you can't call yourself civilized if you destroy your own planet. Why are we looking to Mars? Why are we looking out outer space to, move to next? Why don't you look after your own house, right? Ensure your house is going to be here. Ensure the place where you live is going to be sustainable, livable. That to me is civilization. And I try to follow the teachings that I've been given. I still need way, way more teachings. It's not easy to try to live in a way that follows traditional teachings, but I think it's a beautiful way to live. And it's, like I say, it's not easy, but it would be a lot easier if more people did that, because then you wouldn't be working by yourself all the time or with a handful of people or whatever. So that's my dream, is that what I've learned gets pushed into the future, and maybe the crowd gets bigger. So anyway, that's what I think.
Thanks, Peter. Personally, I've felt a shift since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission 8 years ago, and there's more municipalities and governments and organizations and businesses wanting to involve and get perspectives from Indigenous folks, and there's a push for that. But as we've all alluded to, there's also this challenge of us knowing ourselves first and being able to be able to offer that to someone else who's seeking that. And so I challenge the settlers and businesses and organizations that are listening in to think about their motivation in wanting to involve Indigenous people. Why are they asking for our advice, perspective? Why are they looking to honor Indigenous ways in their work? And how can you do that in ways that are meaningful to the folks that you're asking to be involved? I see a lot in urban environments this work of placemaking and creating spaces or putting in public artwork that somehow indigenizes urban environments. But what's the motivation behind that? Is it a pat on the back for the city builders because it makes them feel good inside that they're doing something, or is it about really creating spaces that are welcoming to Indigenous folks in the present day and give them the tools, resources, supports they need to foster their own reconnection? And so I think about spaces like, opportunities to reconnect with the land in urban environments, spaces to hold ceremony, to congregate and gather with one another, as opposed to putting up a medicine wheel, which doesn't necessarily support that community reconnection. Thinking back to the idea of why we're here and this idea of sustainable development, and Peter's alluded to it many times, is how can we be good human beings if we're not caring for the land in a good way and reconnecting with it and letting it teach us what we need to know because we're not learning the way we should. What does it mean to steward the land? What does good, equitable stewardship of the land in the present day, as humans, as professionals, what does it look like to you, Eric?
We think about the land very differently as Indigenous people. When we talk about the land, it's a part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our present, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us as they really are around us, just as you all do. I think when it comes to equitable stewardship of the land, I think we can do our part by partnering with host nations. I know when we work at Two-Row, we often consult on our local projects with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Huron-Wendat, 6 nations of the Grand River where we're located. We try and bring them in as a community and get their input. It's important. So we like to work with the host nations. I think it's a lot of our projects start and it should end there across the country. I think we should also look to new Canadians. I think there are people coming from areas of the world that can be taught in a new light. So partnering with new Canadians, I think they understand the struggle Indigenous people go through. I know what it feels like to feel like another, and what is my own country, I suppose. So I think that's a great start. Partnering with host nations, helping new Canadians, making them the next stewards of the land for the future. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about all our relations. I think this is a beautiful principle and teaching that Peter started with, thinking about how humans kind of exist after animals in nature, because we came last. I agree with that too. I think we need to think about how everyone exists in sort of unity together. So we need to think about the environment, the water, and the earth as much as we are about the buildings. Try and work with local trades and materials. We export things that has to get there somewhere, and that takes a lot of resources and fuels, especially across oceans. So I think working with local trades, indigenous trades, and local materials all ties in that sustainability aspect that then influences the land.
Thanks. Jess, I know that you work in the environmental realm a lot, and the work of land stewardship looks different, thinking about it from an environmental concept. So what does good land stewardship look like to you?
I think it's really recognizing and supporting the amazing work that's already happening. There's Indigenous nations, there's companies, there's group, Indigenous protected and conserved areas that are already leading the charge for land stewardship, Indigenous guardians programs, Indigenous self-government that are taking on their own environmental management planning. So it's being aware of these and understanding where they might fit into or interact with the work that you're doing. And this really kind of acknowledges that equitable stewardship of the land is recognizing and celebrating Indigenous knowledge, ideas, and experiences in spaces where they're most powerful, so on traditional territory, and resisting the urge to simply integrate these ideas into maybe pre-existing frameworks and processes. And I think this is a huge opportunity in environmental impact assessments, and it's within these finding spaces for multiple ideas to exist, maybe even changing the whole process so that these ideas and perspectives can grow together. And then there's this idea of consent. So it's Indigenous involvement along the path to consent, really taking to heart the notion that the duty to consult and the laws behind it do not mean that Indigenous groups want to deny or veto every project. They want to be involved. They have inherent connections to the workings of the land. And it's through this involvement that they will then have the opportunity to share this knowledge. And taking this another step further into kind of these meaningful reciprocal relations, then it's knowing that this knowledge and these experiences that are shared is in a trusted and safe space, and knowing that the sacred space and the teachings will be protected, but also knowing that these perspectives matter, knowing that their voice, their contributions, and everything will be carried throughout the project and actually make a difference in the end product.
Thanks. Freedom, you mentioned that you grew up in a very urban environment. So I'm wondering what good land stewardship means to you.
For me, I think it has to do with allowing everyone to have a voice. First and foremost, I think inclusive and participatory decision making suffers with the systems, the capitalistic and patriarchal systems that govern our cities. So actively listening, caring, and respecting diverse voices and perspectives, that's often overshadowed. So I think allowing everyone to have a voice by making sure everyone has a seat at the table, which can lead to shared goals and collective efforts towards meaningful outcomes. In addition to that, I'd say not treating land as a commodity, which is deeply ingrained in society, especially in architecture. That's what architecture is founded on. So grappling with that at a professional level, but also embracing the sustainable practices and community engagements and ethical design principles that can help navigate this tension, and working towards a practice that acknowledges and respects the value of the land beyond its economic worth. And then I guess in addition to that, just challenging yourself and your own impact on the land, taking accountability at a professional and a personal level for the impact you have on the land, and trying to change that individually, I guess.
Thank you. Peter, you live, as you mentioned, on a reserve. You live on 6 nations and are connected to Mississaugas of the Credit. Your land, your reserve, is being encroached on from every direction with development. How do you share those teachings of good land stewardship with your neighbors that are circling around?
Well, that's a battle. When I think about good land stewardship, you have to understand the land first, and it gets to a bigger picture where you don't want to ruin your aquifer. You don't want to drain the swamps, and um, that's part of the water purification system that's inherent in the earth. I look at we are being encroached, but we're also being encroached from within because we have a lot of money generated through cigarette factories and all that kind of stuff, and we have people building mansions and large property with manicured lawns and all that kind of stuff, and that's not traditional at all. And so part of it is I guess just being humble. And I look at, and I've always for a long time, because I worked in construction all my life, and I used to wonder how people could afford the houses I saw being built in Brampton and Mississauga and all those places where you had mass development going on, and giant houses, and you come to realize there's only 2 people living in there with their cat and 1 dog, maybe a couple of kids, maybe. But and why? Why do we need that? And so I look at, okay, we're at a point now where there's a great move towards electrification of vehicles. If I look over to what they're doing in Europe, they're using a lot of geothermal for heating their houses, heat pumps, and all those kind of things that we haven't really grabbed a hold of yet. When it comes to architecture, what are we building into the buildings that can make them self-sustainable? Are we putting solar power, building it into the buildings? I've always had this fascination with sun, and how in the middle of winter, if you're on an apartment building, if it could be 16 below zero and the sun's shining, you go to the wall that's the sun's shining on and stick your hand over the edge, your hand will get warm because all the wall is gathering the heat from the sun, and it's rising to the top. And I've often wondered, why don't they make use of that? That's a natural phenomenon. That's what our ancestors would have done. They would have taken advantage of that. They would have sucked that heat in to divert it to keep themselves warm. And so I look at those kind of things, and simple things that maybe around the world Indigenous people are taking advantage of. How do they do that in countries where there's no air conditioning? How do they stay cool? And there's a lot of things that we could incorporate into architecture, and some of those ideas may be really, really old. And there's a lot. I often think about if you went to the U.S. Patent Office and you looked at all the old patents that are in there, how many didn't work because they didn't have the materials that would make them work at that time? how many old ideas are able to be brought to use now with the materials that we have now. And so, if I encourage people to, if you're not going to use the land, let the trees come back. I've often wondered as I drove around, and you see all this farmland that's not really being used, and maybe it's not suitable for farming, and it's just fields of grass, right? Why don't we put trees back there? Those kind of things. That if you try something and it doesn't work, you cut all the trees down, you tried to farm, it doesn't work, put the trees back. The trees do their work. They know what to do. And like if you look at the emerald ash borer has decimated the ash trees. There's room for more trees. There's always room for more trees. And those are the kind of things where municipalities, governments, if there's land that's not being used and it's just sitting there, put trees on it. You don't have to be in rows. They can just randomly plant them, let them start on their own. Put poplar trees and let them start, whatever. But anyway, that's what I say is let nature do its work. It wasn't broke before we, like my dad used to say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And it wasn't broke before. We broke it. So it can repair itself if we help it out. So that's what I say. Like I look at Niagara Peninsula. It should be a monument to stupidity that we paved over our best market gardening land. That's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see this mistake again and again and again. Because, like, why are we paving farmland? Why are we, why don't we select the worst land that's around for growing and then build your town there? That would be my thought. Or one of them anyway.
I want to return to how you started this conversation, Peter, and about how humans came last. And I think when we think about land stewardship, we think about human responsibility to the ground and the earth. But when I think of the word land, I think of the four-legged, the winged, the flowing, the rooted, all our relatives that make up the world around us. And when we make those decisions about how the land should be used, we often do put humans first. It's, is it for agriculture to feed humans? Is it about houses to house humans? Is it about roads to move humans? But we don't think about the impact for all our other relatives, that we're guests in their home, and we're making decisions that impact them. And I want to return to some comments that were made about meaningfully honoring Indigenous ways. And we talked about that engagement piece, but we don't often think about engaging with our non-human relatives. How do we consider the flowing and the rooted and the winged and the finned and the four-legged when we make decisions about development and about honoring old ways? How are their voices, perspectives, and considerations part of our decision making? And that's a challenge because they're not knocking on our doors. They're not writing to their city councilors. We have a responsibility as their relatives to stand up for their interests before ours. And that's the learning that I've had in walking this path of decolonizing, because as Peter mentioned, we've all been assimilated. We're all been taught and influenced in colonial ways, in the words we use, in the clothing we wear, in the cars we buy, are all influenced by colonial practices. And as Indigenous people, we are trying to build those reconnections and find ways to bring those old ways of knowing into our into our practices that we've been taught and our relatives before us have been taught. So it's, I think it's important to think about our responsibility not only to our human relatives, but our non-human relatives. And you know, Peter's mentioned this as well, that, you know, we're responsible for climate change. The climate crisis is because we have not been considerate of those other beings that are our relatives. And our decisions have had impacts on them, which are now impacting us. And I hope we're learning our lesson, because we need to change our ways of thinking. All of this is really heavy. I see lots of wheels turning in everyone's heads about both our own work and our own responsibility, but our opportunities that exist for us as well as professionals. Eric, I'm wondering if you can think about projects you have been involved in, or something you're currently involved in that is doing this work well, that is working to bring those two worldviews together in a good way in your practice. I'm wondering, are there ways you can point to that in your work right now with the art gallery? How has that shown up in a practical way?
Of course. I'm taking this call or conversation from the Art Gallery of Ontario right now. I'm in the Chief Curator's office before I lead some consultation with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So we're working with Chief Stacy and their department, and we're also working with the curators at the AGO, specifically Wanda Nanabush, who put together this sort of wish list of Indigenous artists, journalists, and educators from across the country. So the list was about 30 people. We were able to get about 20 to show up in person on one day, and we all got together along with the Mississaugas of the Credit Host Nation. We had a talking circle. We kind of broke down these boundaries and had a really open conversation that was honest and true. And they put forward their values. And from there, we produced a findings document from those values. And with my knowledge as an architect and my colleagues, we translated their ideas into built form. So we're continuing this conversation, and didn't just end there, but this consultation happens at every stage of the project with the Art Gallery of Ontario. So there's a lot of ways it's built above a loading dock, above OCAD and AGO. So our question was, how do we ground a floating building? It's through terraces, it's through cladding, it's through sustainability, it's through sightlines to the Grange Park. It's like that connection with the land that we're going to ground this building. So that's an example of what I'm doing today, and how our perspectives have really changed a building, not only for everyone in Toronto, but across the world. I mean, this is a place to showcase art for all sorts of BIPOC community, you know? So that's why we have to design it the right way.
Thank you. Freedom, I'm wondering if you can speak to a project that you've been involved in that's brought these worldviews together.
I'd say maybe there was a feasibility study that I worked on with it's a Wellington feasibility study in Toronto, and it was trying to figure out a possible redevelopment of the houseless and vulnerable communities. And so we had to engage with residents, Indigenous members, and as well as people that were stakeholders, such as like doctors and things like that. So it was interesting to hear the different perspectives, because you got to see people that actually interact with these buildings on a day-to-day and that are facing very difficult conditions. You also got to speak with Indigenous perspectives and what their needs are and how that's being missed, especially in an urban context. The lack of sweat lodges that are available, other traditional areas and gathering spaces that are lacking, that are easily accessible for these communities. So, and it wasn't just for the Indigenous people that were hoping to gain these spaces. It was all sorts of walks of life that said they could benefit from these types of spaces, such as sweat lodges and gathering spaces. So it was very informative in that way. And it also just kind of reaffirmed the work that we're doing to try to advocate to make sure these spaces are integrated more in every building that we design. So
Thank you. A few months ago, Jess, I'm going to put you on the spot. A few months ago, Jess and I had breakfast together and met for the first time. And Jess told me a little bit about some of the work she does outside of her day job with the Assembly of First Nations and other organizations using her knowledge and research skills to support Indigenous communities. I'm just wondering, Jess, if you could speak a little bit too about how you are able to use kind of your professional training and academic learning to be of service to the community, and what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah, so I think I can probably talk a bit about kind of my research, but behind that, it's my fourth degree at this point, and I'm doing it because the opportunity kind of fell in my lap to pursue something that I've always been like incredibly passionate about. And it's that whole idea of, what is Indigenous planning? Is planning the right word when it comes to community growth and development at the very local, First Nation level? Because planning is kind of inherently a colonial mindset and a colonial, discipline. But Indigenous communities are going through growth as well, and they want to kind of create better lives and better opportunities for the people that are living in the communities. But yeah, it's understanding if planning is the right word. So I think I have this kind of incredible opportunity to pursue this research and work with people both at the University of Guelph, but also tied into the work that I'm doing at SOAR and learning from my colleagues there as we try and grow our company, as we are, relatively new, and we bring lots to the table as it comes to Indigenous perspectives. And then, yeah, there is that little bit of work that I have been doing with the Assembly of First Nations, kind of more in a supportive role and getting to experience how the development of kind of more of a federal level document on how Indigenous perspectives are kind of paving their way in all aspects of Indigenous growth and communities, economic development, things like that. So yeah, it is busy, but there's a lot of things that are working together to hopefully create some great end products and continue to establish great relationships.
Thanks, Jess. Peter, I know that you've been involved for many years as a knowledge keeper, an elder, an advisor, an activist. In this work of advising folks trying to do good work and build relationships with your community, can you think of a project that you were involved in, that you advised on or were consulted on, that you really feel like your voice and perspective was heard and actually led to a shift in the project? If you could tell us a little bit about an example that you can think of.
Well, I can't really think of an individual project, but here's how I describe what I do. There's a parasitic wasp that lays an egg in the host. The egg hatches, doesn't kill the host right away. It even influences the way the host eats so that it can benefit itself, but eventually it takes over and the host dies. I like to think of myself as a parasitic wasp, and I go around laying eggs in people's heads and try to get them to think differently so that whatever they're doing that might influence the way something is built or planned, or something might be built into something from something that I may have said or got them to think about. So that's kind of the way I look at what I do is I try to tell stories. I try to get people to think differently. Um, and I lay that little seed in there, and hopefully it germinates. And you know, I might be long gone, 6 feet under before the result comes. But I really don't care about that. It's you know, if you can do that, you don't have to be. It's like planting a tree. You plant a tree. You know, I'm kind of getting old, long in tooth. So if I plant a tree, a shade tree, I'm not going to probably live long enough to be sitting in the shade. But I think you should still go around planting those trees. And so it's really hard to say, okay, I did this or that. And I really don't want to do that anyway. You know, um, you don't have to stand in front, is what I say. You can push from behind. You can plant the seed and leave, um, and you know, go to the next place. Do the same thing again. And I think that's you know a less stressful way of doing things because you don't have to wait around for the result. And you know, you have to have some faith that whatever you um, have done is going to change something. Um, and you know, like I've had people come to me and say, you know, I heard you talk, you know, and I don't know how many years ago, and it changed what I did or how I thought or how I live. And that's, I think, the role of elders um, is to do those kind of things. And you know, like you talk to so many people, you can't remember them all. You don't have to remember them all, you know. And um, I don't really think it's a good idea to go around blowing your own horn, especially if there's nobody parked in front of you. You know, just keep on moving. So that's kind of what I look at. You know, I like that wasp. It's a good example to use. It's a good way to think. So, and we learn from our relatives, and that relative taught me that. So, language.
Well, I think today you've planted lots of wasps, parasitic wasps today in this conversation. So thank you for that. I think that that's a really good analogy, and I think that that is the responsibility of involving Indigenous people in this work is opportunities for us to plant seeds and for those seeds to influence and grow, but caring for those seeds and nurturing them is the responsibility of the collective and the people around us. So we can provide our knowledge and our wisdom and our perspective, but it's the work of others around us who care for that knowledge, foster it, and make sure that it continues to grow. Well, I just have one final question to kind of close, and I think that you know, many in the audience listening in today, and those who will watch the recording after are likely looking for those seeds, those nuggets of knowledge from each of us. So if this is folks' first kind of dip into this conversation of really reflecting on Indigenous ways of incorporating that into development, into city building, into their work with the land, for the land, what is your one piece of advice that you want the listeners today to take away from this conversation? What's the most important thing that they think about, reflect on their journey? Freedom, I'll go to you first.
I would say trying to take a step back and see the bigger picture, being fully present, and trying to cultivate a personal connection with the land and appreciating its beauty and significance in your own way. And like you all were alluding to, the land doesn't just mean the ground we're on, it also refers to the water, the skies, and the animals that were here first. So just trying to really reflect on that connection. And even if you did grow up in Toronto or the GTA like I did, like there's still, everyone has their own connection in some way to the land. If it's that caterpillar that's like crawling up your apartment building and you're like, where did that come from? There's no grass anywhere. Like like you're somehow connected to the land. And so I think reflecting on that and appreciating it and then trying to act accordingly.
Thanks. Jess, what's your one nugget you want to leave folks with?
I think it might be obvious based on what I've shared today that I am quite passionate on the relationship building piece, that point where non-Indigenous groups and Indigenous groups come together. So it is at that point, are we approaching these relationships with generative mindsets or non-generative mindsets? So a non-generative mentality can, it look like denial or fragility or feeling like you need to save or fix someone. And Indigenous individuals can exhibit non-generative mentalities as well. And this may be visible in anger or blaming, but it's worth noting that Indigenous people, they are in different stages of moving through past and ongoing trauma. But if they are seeking opportunities to collaborate and they want to move forward together, they're likely in a generative mindset and are expecting the same from you as well. And also part of this, generative mentality relates back to what Miranda was saying earlier on, why do you want to be an ally? Why are you pursuing Indigenous relations? It should come from this idea that you have a choice on whether or not you stand up for Indigenous voices. And kind of on that deep, meaningful level, it's understanding that, we're all sharing this land together. And if one of us is struggling to get by, then we're all struggling to get by. And it then becomes, more uncertain and difficult to maneuver the future of, climate change and sustainable development if we aren't moving forward together.
Eric, what are you hoping folks take away from today?
Sure. I mean, you're all here today because you want to learn and educate yourself. So I would say, please continue this relearning on this journey. The University of Alberta has a free 12-lesson online course called Indigenous Canada. Check it out. Also, there are Indigenous artists, designers, authors, educators, musicians. They're all readily accessible and willing to share their teachings. So keep an open mind, practice true listening. I think we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so I'd like to leave you with that.
Thank you. Just on Eric's point, I'm going to come back to you, Freedom and Jessica. Is there a resource that you think folks should check out or follow up on if they want to learn more? Can you think of something?
Yeah, I'm like most of the way through this piece from Elwood Jimmy, Vanessa Andriotti, and Sharon Stein called Towards Braiding. And it's a great resource for, starting out on that relationship building journey. There are a lot of really, I guess, powerful poems in this document as well that talk about kind of tokenism or different things like that. So yeah, it's called Towards Braiding.
Jess, I'm surprised you said it. I didn't plant it. That's my cousin Elwood that wrote that book. So we'll make sure that the resources that are shared get out to the folks, links to them. Freedom, can you think of a resource that people should follow up on?
I don't have a book or a website or anything, but I kind of grew up with a friendship center. My mom worked at the Indigenous Network based in Mississauga. And so if you look up, there's many friendship centers across Ontario, and I'm assuming other provinces. If you just look it up and try to get involved, donate your time, donate money, donate your resources, and go in with an open mind and heart and try to learn as well. I would say that.
Yeah, I'll leave the last thought to Peter, but I just wanted to build on what's already been shared. And I think the one thing I want folks to take away is that their learning journey is their responsibility. Don't expect Indigenous people to teach you what you need to know, because it's all available out there. There are memoirs that are written by Indigenous people. There are courses to take. There are podcasts to listen to, there are movies to watch, and it's all accessible. And so chart your own path of learning and learn what you need to know to do your job well, and don't rely on Indigenous folks to teach you what you think you need to know. I think that's important. The other thing I wanted to offer as a takeaway is be kind to one another. Recognize that we all collectively are learning still 200 plus years later how to live together, how to understand one another, and how to do that in kind, meaningful ways. And so I think if we all approach it with that openness and kindness, that we'll all just do each other better in building good relationships. Peter, what's your one takeaway you're hoping folks will take from this conversation?
I'm going to suggest that they go and get a book called Braiding Sweetgrass and read it. I think that one would help you as a non-Indigenous person understand our philosophy towards the land, and also help you to think about what you're doing if you're going to be building, you're going to be developing. I say when it comes to construction, there first has to be destruction, because you have to destroy what's there to build what you're going to build. And money is a poor unit to be using when it comes to valuing the land and what it's used for. So I think, reading that book will change a lot of people's way of thinking, and also help boost the sales for Robin Wall Kimmerer. But anyway, it's a really a well-written book and a way of looking at the world from a different perspective. And I think that's key. And it's like I take my glasses off and you guys are all blurry. No, I'm kidding. But when you change what you're looking through, it gives you a great way of looking at the world, and maybe that seems something you never saw before. And that's true in our language. If you were to learn our language and be fluent and understand the true meanings of the words, not just the English Ojibwe dictionary meaning where you lose 60% of what the word means, it changes the way you think. And it changes how you look at things. And I always go back to that word for insects, which is manadonsak. That's what you see in the dictionary, insects, manadonsak. And so for anyone who doesn't know anything about the language at all, which would be me, you think that that's what that word means. What the word really means is little spirits, which changes the way you look at insects. It's like taking these glasses off and I see, bad things. I take them off and I see beautiful fireflies, butterflies, and all the termites and wood ticks disappear. but anyway, they're all insects, but they all have a purpose, right? And so that's what I would say. Try, as I said in the beginning, change your philosophy. And you can do that by changing these things, what you look through.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have glasses, I can't help you. Anyway, miigwech.
Thank you. I want to say thank you. I raise my hands in gratitude to everyone in the circle today for your thoughts, your advice, your wisdom, your perspective. And I'm grateful for this conversation and our time together. For the two-legged, for the four-legged, the winged, the finned, the flowing, the rooted, all our relations. Thank you. Turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you, Miranda. I was gonna pull up a PowerPoint presentation, but we've created such a beautiful space here that I'm just gonna not pull it up. And I just ask that we have a moment to pause and think about what we've heard. I know I've really been moved by it, so I'm just gonna try and keep calm while I talk. So thank you again for everything that you've said. We do have two representatives, one from the town of Caledon and one from the city of Mississauga. And they're just going to take a moment to reflect from our on what they've heard today. And I'll just take a second to introduce them. So Sharon Mittman is an accomplished senior leader with over 25 years of experience in government. She's known for creating opportunities and delivering innovative solutions to complex challenges. And she is the manager of urban design. And as such, she's a senior advisor for the Green Development Standards Update. And then Antoinetta Minicillo is the Director of Planning with the town of Caledon and has a history of advancing innovative and collaborative approaches to the environment, urban design, and organizational transformation. Before they begin, again, I just have such gratitude for the conversation that happened today. You created such a beautiful space, so thank you from Miranda for moderating this conversation. And we really have, I'll just speak for myself, I really have taken away a lot of points, specifically from Peter. Thank you for all the anecdotes and being able to share your wisdom with you. It really was meaningful. And I've got a scrawling of notes, but really that idea of being able to change your mind and your perspective as you continue on this path was really meaningful to me. And so I continue to commit to that as moving forward, both as a professional and an individual living in Ontario right now in this land. So thank you with that. And I'll now pass it over to Sharon to share her reflections with you.
There we go. Hello, thank you very much. And thank you, Erin, for passing it on. I want to thank all the panelists, first of all, Peter, Jessica, Freedom, and Erica, and particularly Miranda. Thank you for sharing your experiences through your processes, and your knowledge has widened and opened my eyes to different perspectives and different views. Peter, your words particularly resonated with me. We got here last. And I know this, and I've known this my entire life, but it's always good to be reminded of that. We share a shared vision and a shared goal, and I look forward to working with all of you through the Green Development Strategy and continuing to move forward together. And Eric and Jessica and Freedom, I really appreciate your always teaching and learning, and I can imagine you are tired from all of us trying to learn from you. Miranda, your comment about the spaces and how we acknowledge Indigenous people really resonated with me, and particularly because you mentioned we should be creating spaces that celebrate land in the urban environment. And that's going to be a real challenge going forward with the new Planning Act changes that have come down from the province. Land is scarce in an urban environment, and becoming one with land, or even just enjoying land, is going to be more challenging. So that has just given me a new perspective on moving forward. And I hope we can continue to work with you all through the process. And I appreciate all your comments today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sharon. I'll now turn it over to Antoinette.
Thank you. Similarly to Sharon, my heartfelt thank you to all of you on the panel today for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and a couple of things that resonated with Sharon also resonated with me, and that is that you're tired, but you're tirelessly committed. So I thank you for that tireless commitment. I know that we rely on you so much, and you said something, we need to do the work. It's not your Indigenous people's responsibility. It's us who have to do the work. And so here at the town of Caledon, and myself personally am committed to continue to invest in that and do the work. A lot of the things that also resonated for me was the separation, the fact that we sort of hosted a panel on green development standards, which are essentially, as you mentioned, a colonial practice. And so we needed to kind of move away from that. And the conversation went into such a better place, which was it's the human last piece, and the fact that how are the perspectives of the non-human sort of around the table being considered? And they were mentioned several times: the rooted, the winged, the four-legged, the flowing, and the finned. And I'm sorry if I missed any of them, but it was really like for the people who don't have a voice around the table, who we can't even invite to the table, for example, how do we ensure that we plan for the land and for all the things that are impacted by the decisions that we make? And I think that for us moving forward with, green development standards and how we want to speak about those things, the heart of the matter is that we're trying to protect the land, what the land can teach us, and honoring all those relations and knowing that everything exists in unity. So I think that really stood out for me. It's really about so much more than us and checking a box of, yes, we're moving towards green development standards. That's a nice little thing, but it's not the bigger picture. And it's just the very beginning of a lot of work that we need to do. A lot of things that also resonated with me is we create what we think. So we have to change the way we're thinking to create new and better, or in fact, maybe go, learn from the teachings, Indigenous teachings on how to create new ways of thinking, and also just live in such a way that people might want to follow us and follow you. This resonated for me in light of Bill 23, Bill 109, all of these changes. We're being asked to do more with less, go faster, more housing, at the expense of environment, people, hearts, mind, the future of the planet. And that juxtaposition, I know professionally, it doesn't sit well with me. And yet here we are, if we sort of don't, I don't want to say comply, but if we don't follow these new sets of rules in a way that's expedient and quick and it results in more housing, there's sort of penalties. But there's a bigger picture. There's so much more to the conversation that has not been weaved into the fabric of this new legislation. So I take that sort of as a responsibility on us to find a way to not lose what matters, or to reclaim what matters: land, people, hearts, and minds throughout, and opportunities in this new planning regime that we have to operate in. And I understand also that, the planning piece itself, is that even the right word? That resonated with me as well. So thank you for all of that in such a short amount of time. And I look forward to looking through some of the resources you've recommended to help, us advance a better conversations and a journey and a meaningful relationship between us as we move forward.
Thank you very much for those reflections. We're getting to the end of our conversation today. And so instead of breaking this space with, again, a PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to ask that Amina just add some links into the chat. We open that back up again. And what that will be is an opportunity, if you've got reflections that you would like to share, if there is something that you've heard today that is meaningful for you, we've opened up what I'm calling like a reflection page on the Mississauga's Green Development Standards. And this is where you can think about some of the things that you heard today and add them as like an idea or a thought or reflection. And we'll be collecting these and using these again. I'm not quite sure how we're going to use them, to be honest, but I think it's an opportunity to be able to really deeply think and dive into what was shared today. There was really so much to be taken from the points that everyone gave here, from Freedom, from Miranda, from Eric, from Jessica, from Peter. I think everything hit us at a different point, and we are at a different stage in our journey, each of us. And so whatever you were able to take away and share, if there's resources as settlers that you found to be helpful on your journey through this, and ways in which you're able to help others learn, would be very helpful as well. I know for me, when I did read the Braiding Sweetgrass a couple summers ago while I was off work, it was a very profound book, Peter. And I just listened to it very slowly in the kitchen every morning as I did my weaving. And it was one of those things that really helped me better understand the land that I currently live on, because I am from a different space, from the West Coast. So how do I better understand grass even? Like, what is that about? What's the relationship we have with grass? And so that was something that really stuck with me. But all this is to say, thank you so much for your time today. And what I'm going to ask now is that Peter close today's session. And again, we will have, if you have thoughts that you want to share, we have that link in the chat. Please go to the Green Development Standard website. It's even just a mouthful saying it after this conversation, but you'll have an opportunity to reflect there. And Peter, if you can, and I would be very grateful if you could bring the discussion to a close with a closing.
Okay, I'm going to repeat some of the words that I started off with. Bajoma shomas keshimanado. Ajibiagani eneni endago mishikanto dem. Bigwich gijigatungum. Bigwich kakanagego ninewakanakwewak. Namara benama we anoking we wodoka mazokamakwe and we maganaduk. Chimigwich gijimanado. Minabamatsuan. Wadoka gakanagego and then wakanakwewak. We wodoka mazokamakwe and we maganaduk. Chimigwich gijimanado. Nom de wa, Maneshiak Nongum, Nom de wa, Jitmo, Chimigwich, Gajimanado. So I usually make endings shorter than beginnings. And I have to say now that our creation story doesn't have an ending. And what I said was I gave thanks for the people who are sitting and working to help the rest of creation, to help the earth. And I gave thanks that I heard birds today, and I heard a squirrel. Oh, I think that's really good that we have opportunity to interact with the rest of creation. And I gave thanks for our good life, because we truly do have a good life, even if we're having a hard time. I always think about what my mother told me. Don't complain about what you don't have. Be thankful for what you got. Even if it's just a ham sandwich and there's no meat on it, still be thankful. That is the way to defeat greed. So, thank you for listening, and I hope everyone goes out and listens to a couple of birds. They got nice songs out today. You might even get a chance to request a song. It might be just a bird song, but it'll be a good one.